What if everything you thought made you strong was actually hiding your biggest weakness? This is not just a challenge. This is where people break, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And what happens next will shock you. Watch till the end because this journey changes everything. And if you want more real, intense stories like this, hit subscribe right now because you do not want to miss what is coming next. He remembered the exact moment everything changed, when the message came through. It did not feel like just another opportunity or another reality show. It felt like something much deeper, almost like a challenge thrown directly at his identity. For years, he had been moving through life, telling himself he was doing enough, pushing himself just enough to feel accomplished, but never enough to truly transform. And when this offer arrived, it forced him to confront that quiet truth he had been avoiding. He said yes almost instantly, not because he was fully confident, but because he knew he needed something to shake him out of his routine, something that would demand more from him than he had ever demanded from himself before. And that was the beginning of a journey that would test not just his strength, but his discipline, his mindset, and everything he believed about his own limits. At first, it felt exciting, like stepping into something unknown but controlled, like he could prepare for it, like he could train his way into success. But that illusion did not last long, because as soon as he started preparing seriously, he realized this was not like anything he had faced before. He pushed himself harder in the gym, trying to build endurance, trying to increase his stamina, trying to convince himself that if he worked hard enough, he would be ready. But there was always that voice in the back of his mind reminding him that he had said the same thing before, that he had reached a point before where he thought he was ready and then stopped. And this time, he could not afford to stop. This time, there was no comfortable middle ground, no place where he could tell himself he had done enough, because he knew the environment he was about to enter would not accept average, it would not accept excuses, it would not accept hesitation. And as the days passed, his training became more intense, more focused, more desperate in a way, because he was not just preparing physically, he was trying to build confidence, trying to eliminate doubt, trying to create a version of himself that could survive what was coming. And for a while, it seems like it was working. He felt stronger, he felt faster, he felt more capable, and that gave him a sense of control, a belief that maybe he had figured it out, maybe this time he had pushed past his old limits. But then something unexpected happened, something that shook that confidence completely. His progress stopped, not gradually, but suddenly, like hitting a wall that he could not see coming. One day he was improving, and the next day he felt stuck, like his body was no longer responding, like his effort was no longer producing results. And that moment was more unsettling than anything he had experienced so far, because it introduced doubt in a way that felt real, not theoretical, not something he could ignore, but something he had to face directly. He started questioning everything, his training, his preparation, his mindset, wondering if he had misjudged the entire situation, wondering if he had overestimated himself and underestimated what was ahead. And then came the next challenge, the one that completely changed his perspective. He began training in areas he had not taken seriously before, and that is when he discovered just how unprepared he really was. He stepped into the water thinking it would be just another part of the process, something he could adapt to quickly, but instead it exposed a weakness he could not ignore. Every movement felt heavier, every breath felt shorter, every second felt like a struggle, and it forced him to realize that strength is not universal, that being strong in one area does not mean being capable in another, and that realization created urgency. He started pushing himself in new ways, carrying weight for long distances, forcing his body to adapt to discomfort, putting himself in situations where quitting would be easier than continuing, and every time he wanted to stop, he reminded himself why he started, because this was not just about completing a challenge, it was about proving something to himself, proving that he could push past the version of himself that always settled for enough. And as the time to begin approached, the pressure started to build, not from outside expectations, but from within, from the knowledge that he had committed to something that would reveal everything, every weakness, every doubt, every limitation. And when he finally stepped into that environment, everything changed instantly. There was no transition, no gradual adjustment. It was immediate intensity, immediate pressure, immediate demand. And all the preparation, all the training, all the effort suddenly felt smaller compared to the reality of what he was facing. He expected physical exhaustion. He expected pain. He expected his body to be pushed beyond its limits. But what he did not expect was how quickly his mind would begin to struggle, how simple things would become difficult, how instructions would become harder to remember, how focus would begin to slip in ways he had never experienced before. Where he was given clear directions and seconds later he could not recall them fully. Where tasks that seemed simple became overwhelming because his mind could not process everything at once. And that was the moment he realized this was not just about endurance. It was about control, about maintaining clarity under pressure, about staying present when everything inside you is telling you to shut down. And that realization shifted everything, because now the challenge was not just external, it was internal. It was about managing his thoughts, managing his reactions, managing the chaos that started building inside his head. And as the experience continued, that mental pressure only increased. It became constant, like a weight that never lifted, forcing him to stay alert, forcing him to stay engaged, even when his body was exhausted and his mind was overwhelmed. And in those moments, he began to see a different side of himself, a side that was not always confident, not always in control, but still capable of continuing, still capable of pushing forward, even when nothing felt certain. And that became the defining element of his journey. Not perfection, not dominance, but persistence, the ability to keep going when everything felt uncertain, when every step forward required effort, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. And as he looked around at the people sharing that experience with him, he realized he was not alone in that struggle, that everyone there was facing their own version of the same battle, each person dealing with their own doubts, their own limitations, their own breaking points. And that created a connection, something unspoken but understood, a sense that while they were all individuals, they were also part of something collective, something that required them to support each other, to rely on each other even in an environment designed to test them individually. And that balance between competition and teamwork created tension, but also respect, because they knew that success was not just about individual performance, it was about surviving the experience together. And that realization added another layer to the challenge, because now it was not just about pushing himself. It was about being aware of others, about understanding when to lead, when to support, when to step back, and when to step forward. And that constant adjustment required focus, awareness, and emotional control, things that became harder to maintain as the pressure increased. And as the days went on, the lines between physical, mental, and emotional challenges began to blur, creating an experience that felt all-consuming, where every moment demanded something from him, where every decision carried weight, where every mistake felt amplified. And yet, through all of that, there was a sense of growth, a sense that something was changing, not just in his abilities, but in his perspective, in the way he viewed himself, in the way he understood his limits and his potential. And that transformation was not comfortable. It was not easy. It was not something he could clearly define in the moment. But it was happening, and he could feel it in the way he responded to pressure, in the way he handled uncertainty, in the way he continued moving forward, even when he questioned himself. And that is where the real journey began, not at the start, not during the preparation, but in those moments of doubt, those moments where he had to choose between stopping and continuing, between giving in and pushing through. And every time he chose to continue, he moved closer to something he had been searching for, something deeper than success, something more meaningful than completion, something that could only be discovered by facing the very limits he once avoided and breaking through them piece by piece until there was nothing left to hide from and nothing left to prove except to himself. Varys, move beautifully. As the days moved forward, the intensity did not decrease, it evolved, becoming more unpredictable, more personal, and far more difficult to prepare for. Because by this point, the physical exhaustion was expected. It was almost familiar. But what continued to catch him off guard was the way his mind reacted under constant pressure. The way clarity would disappear at the worst possible moments, the way confidence would suddenly drop without warning. And that created a new kind of challenge, one that could not be solved with strength or endurance alone. It required awareness, it required control, and most of all, it required honesty with himself. something that became harder the more the experience pushed him. Because every task was designed not just to test ability, but to expose hesitation, to reveal doubt, to force quick decisions in situations where thinking clearly felt almost impossible. And he found himself in moments where he had to rely on instinct more than logic, where he had to trust reactions he was not fully confident in, and accept the consequences, whether they were right or wrong. And that uncertainty became one of the most difficult parts of the entire experience, because it removed the sense of control he had always depended on. It forced him into a space where he could not plan everything, where he could not predict outcomes, where he had to adapt constantly. And as that pressure built, it started to affect him in ways he did not expect, emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually. Because when the body is pushed to its limit and the mind begins to struggle, there is nothing left to rely on except what's inside. And that is when deeper thoughts begin to surface. Thoughts about past decisions, about relationships, about moments that were never fully resolved. And he describes times where those thoughts would come without warning, interrupting his focus, pulling him away from the present moment, and forcing him to confront things he had been avoiding for years. And those moments were not easy. They were not something he could simply push aside, because the environment did not allow distractions. It amplified everything, making every emotion feel stronger, every thought feel louder, every doubt feel more real. And at times, that led to emotional release, not because of physical pain, but because of the weight of everything happening internally. Because when you are placed in a situation where there is no escape, no comfort, no familiar support system, you are left alone with your thoughts. And for him, that became one of the most challenging aspects of the entire journey. He spoke about moments where he felt overwhelmed, not by the tasks, but by the realization of how much he had been carrying mentally, how much he had suppressed, how much he had avoided. And in those moments, the experience shifted from being a test to becoming a mirror, reflecting back parts of himself he had not fully acknowledged. And that realization brought a new level of understanding, because it showed him that strength is not just about pushing forward, it's also about facing what is behind you, what you have been holding on to, and deciding what to do with it. And as he continued through the process, that understanding began to influence the way he approached everything, not just the challenges, but the people around him. Because in that environment, relationships formed quickly, not out of convenience, but out of necessity, out of shared experience, out of mutual understanding of what it meant to be pushed to the edge. And he found himself connecting with others in ways that felt genuine, not forced, because there was no space for pretense, no room for superficial interaction. Everything was real, everything was immediate, and that created a sense of respect, a sense of unity, even in moments where the structure of the experience tried to separate them, tried to create individual pressure within a group dynamic. And those moments were some of the hardest, because they tested not just individual strength, but loyalty, empathy, and the ability to balance personal survival with collective support. And he realized that in those situations, the instinct to help others did not disappear, even when the pressure increased, even when the environment encouraged self-focus. There was still a desire to see others succeed, to see them push through their own struggles. And that created a powerful dynamic where competition existed but did not define the experience, where support became just as important as performance. And as the journey continued, that balance became more difficult to maintain, because fatigue increased, because mistakes became more costly, because the margin for error became smaller. And yet, through all of that, he continued to adapt, continued to learn, continued to push forward, even when he wasn't sure how much more he had left to give. And that persistence became the foundation of everything, because it allowed him to move through moments of doubt without being controlled by them. It allowed him to continue even when clarity was gone, even when confidence was low. And as he reflected on that, he began to see how those same patterns existed in his life outside of the experience, how there were moments where he reacted instead of responding, where he allowed emotions to dictate actions, where he avoided accountability because it was easier than facing the truth. And that realization was not comfortable. It was not something he welcomed easily, but it was necessary because it gave him the opportunity to change, to approach things differently, to take responsibility in a way he had not fully done before. And that shift in perspective became one of the most important outcomes of the entire journey because it extended beyond the experience itself. It influenced how he viewed his relationships, how he understood his past, and how he wanted to move forward. And when the conversation turned toward those relationships, he did not avoid the complexity. He acknowledged it directly. He spoke about the challenges, the misunderstandings, the moments where communication broke down, and the consequences that followed. And he admitted that there were times where he reacted from a place of frustration, from a place of hurt, rather than understanding, and that those reactions contributed to the difficulties he later faced. And that level of honesty was not easy, but it was necessary because it allowed him to see his role clearly, not as the only factor, but as a part of the whole. And that understanding led him to a decision that required courage, choosing to apologize, choosing to reach out to those he had hurt, even when he knew the response might not be positive, even when he knew that the wounds were still fresh and that forgiveness was not guaranteed. And he described that process as one of the most difficult steps he had taken, not because of what he had to say, but because of what it